Hanging out now with Geoff Schwartz. Geoff, what did you learn, if anything, from the number that came out with the NFL salary cap and all of the franchise tags that have been given and also all of the people who are already free agents? Is it kind of what you anticipated? What do you foresee over the next little bit as NFL free agency moves closer and closer?
So one way for the cap to get massaged, and this happened back in 2011 with the new CBA then, I was in the NFL at this time, was one way to massage the cap is to borrow from the future, or to use like these player performance checks that we get every year and kind of move it around and whatnot. And so, I'm curious how much massaging of the cap they did. It was reported that the owners did not want to borrow from the future, which I guess sounds kind of odd because I'm like, these deals are going to be huge. Why would you not want to borrow from the future to make your team better now, right? I mean, all these guys are having to cut these veterans. So I want to know, did they do that? Did they borrow from the future? But to me, it shows that the NFL, even in a COVID year, I know the cap went down, but they're still just a huge entity, right? I mean, you look at other sports, how much they've lost equity during a COVID year. I mean, they're far worse than the NFL. And even while the NFL is losing money, at least for one season, they just signed a massive TV deal. They're going to sign 4 more massive TV deals in the next 6 months. And the cap's going to rise. It was reported yesterday or the day before, like $250 million in 4 years. It's at 182 right now. It was at 198 last year. So it's just a blip a little bit, downwards, obviously because of COVID. And I feel bad for veterans that are getting cut that normally would not have been released. And so it kind of floods the market. There's a lot of good players this year. If you're a team that's looking to target 1 or 2 positions, especially offensive line and wide receiver, you might get some guys cheaper than you would normally.
Do you expect a lot of one-year deals because of the way the salary cap is structured, or do you think some guys could sign multi-year deals, take low number in the first year, and then get bigger numbers in the second and third year? I know that's kind of counter to what typically happens in the NFL, but I'm just curious about how exactly this will be set up, because it seems to me with the $182.5 million salary cap and the number coming down and a lot of teams having to make cuts to get there, that the likelihood would be a lot of one-year deals, maybe substantially beneath what would be an ordinary market price.
I'm with you there. I think a lot of people are going to bet on themselves for this 1 year. You're still going to see those massive contracts. Some of these, Kenny Galladay, the wide receiver, Joe Tooney, the Patriots left guard. I mean, some of these guys will get those massive deals, and those deals will be arranged. To your point, they're going to, and they do spread the money out over the deal. But I think we'll see a lot of situations where you just get far less in year 1 and get way more in year 2 and 3. But there'll be a lot of veterans that say, hey, look, I could sign a 1-year deal, let's just say for, a 3-year deal for $30 million, or, which is, but I could make $18 million the year afterwards if I just take a 1-year deal, right? And kind of just make a 1-year. So I think we're going to see a lot of that deal making. And I did it twice in my career, not because of salary cap reasons. I bet on myself twice. 1 year, I didn't play very well in Minnesota. I got hurt again. I had to sign another 1-year deal. I did it in Kansas City. Teams typically don't like signing 1-year deals. They like doing 2-year deals to spread the bonus out. And then if you hit in the year that they pay you, the 1-year deal, they want you for year 2 very cheap. And it worked the second time. I bet on myself. Like, I think you should bet on yourself as a player. Dak did it. Worked well. Yeah,
and that's what I was going to ask you, because that leads very well into Dak Prescott. Were you surprised 4 years, $160 million?
No, I wasn't. And you have to, I think, include last year as well in this. So it's like a 5-year deal for 191, somewhere around there, which is just below Deshaun Watson's number. And great for Dak, right? I mean, obviously, fantastic for after that injury.
And he'll be only 31 years old, so he'll be able to hit free agency in theory again.
I just look at the Cowboys and say, hey, man, like, you should have signed him at least last year. But I think this might have been his agent's plan. Like, hey, we'll ride out. We're young. I think we're in a new wave of just general thinking about contracts, because there was the medical technology now, the rehab, the way you can get back from injuries. I think injuries are not looked at in the same way. We're like, if you play on a 1-year franchise tag, and Dak got hurt, he had one of the worst injuries you can have, right? Fracture dislocation of an ankle. the rehab and recovery now is so unique, is so good that players aren't really worried about injuries anymore. Like, yes, of course it can matter, but when you're so young like Dak is, well, I'll play a 1-year deal because I'll be injured and I'll be fine next year. I'll make more money next year. And so it's just so different now.
It is kind of fascinating in many ways that, and I had the natural thought when he injured himself in such a severe fashion, right, that your first thought is, oh man, how is he going to be able to come back from this because he's on the franchise tag and he turned down a lot of money. And ultimately, it seems that he's on the path to recovery and should be able to theoretically be able to take the field in September back to being full health.
Right.
And I look at these contracts now. Patrick Mahomes averaging $45 million, for instance. Dak averaging 40 plus.
Right.
Where's the ceiling? Like in this new salary cap, do you think we could have like $100 million a year quarterback?
I mean, that's probably going to be many, many years away.
Like 10 years? I mean, is 10 years, is it crazy to think in 10 years we could have a $100 million quarterback?
I think the highest quarterbacks, like let's say the cap was $200 million this year, right? There's the cap hit is about 20% for quarterback, 25%. I'm not good at math, like somewhere around there. Yeah. So if the cap is to $500 million, and sure, $100 million feels possible. I guess $80 million. I mean, it's going to infinitely grow up. I don't think if the cap. I think the cap has to grow to that level for that to be worth it. I mean, paying a quarterback.
Oh, there's no doubt. I don't mean that they would get. I don't mean that they would get like half of the cap. I just mean that the cap is going to increase at such a rate that $40 or $45 million is not going to seem that much for a quarterback in the next 5 to 7 years.
I mean, here's what's crazy. So 2013 was the year, 2014 was the year I was a free agent. All right, and we had just kind of, like I said, the cap in 2011 had gone down a little bit with the new CBA because the players got less of a cut, and it was slowly kind of building back up. I signed a deal, 4-year deal for almost $17 million, ton of money, right? I mean, just 7 years later, if I was a free agent in this year, let's just assume that the cap was at $200 million. I mean, I'd be looking at 4 years, $48 million. Like like the salaries have risen so fast in the NFL because they're pouring in money. Now this year obviously might be a little different because of COVID, but like it's pretty remarkable how fast these salaries have risen.
We're talking to Geoff Schwartz. We're breaking down the upcoming NFL free agency as well as the Dak Prescott contract and more. So as you look at the trajectory of the NFL, there now is even more so, I would say, such a clear caste system, right? It's like quarterbacks can go out and make hundreds of millions of dollars. Almost every other position, you're trying to make millions, right? Even get to that first contract after you're drafted so you can at least hit free agency once. Is that a locker room issue where you're getting this massive almost class divide where it's like, I mean, think about it. Because your average quarterback, if he's good, let's use Dak for an example. Dak could play until he's 40, meaning he has another 15 years. He's like Wooderson in Dazed and Confused. Like all the other players are staying the same age, right? They're like 25, 26 years old. And he's aging. You kind of see it now with Brady where, like, sometimes you watch the Tampa Bay Buccaneers games, and Brady has to have way more in common with, for instance, Byron Leftwich than he does the average skill position on his offense, right?
Correct.
He's 43. Leftwich is probably, I don't even know, 46 or 47. And, they're contemporaries in some ways. And then the other dudes he's handing off to or throwing to might be 22 or 23 years old. They're a totally different generation than him.
I mean, they're potentially going to draft a player this year who wasn't even born when Tom Brady was drafted. That's
unbelievable.
There's a possibility that happens.
My point with that is Brady's going to make, and I think you can use Mahomes as an example now, generational, like 20 years of money almost.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, Dub did you say, Dub, that Brady's older than Leftwich?
Yeah, Leftwich is 41.
So that's even funnier. I thought Leftwich was a couple of years old. Leftwich is my exact age. So that's funny to think about is Brady is older than the guy that a lot of people are talking about as deserving to be a coach and certainly his offensive coordinator. That's funny in and of itself, but it goes to my point on contemporaries. Like Brady and Leftwich probably get along really, really well because they're basically the same age. And then Brady, they're probably like, I'm just using Chris Godwin as an example. Godwin's 25 or 26, and they're like, oh, that knucklehead, he never even watched Saved by the Bell. They're just different generations.
It is. I think the class divide is a good question because, I think with the old, where there was no rookie wage scale, there was a lot of that, right? Where you have rookies, these guys that haven't proven anything, that haven't kind of earned their spot, getting, $70 million guaranteed before they even played a football game. Now with a rookie wage scale that's more manageable, I think there's not so much of that, like, hey, why are we paying that guy? But I do think there is, in any position, if you pay someone and they don't produce like you pay them, everyone on the team is going to look at them sideways. The thing about it, though, is that even if you are on a rookie contract, your first year you're making like $500,000 now. I mean, that's a lot. That's generational money. I mean, not generational money, but like for someone who grew up maybe in a bad situation or didn't grow up with money, that's a ton of money, right? Like, it's hard to be jealous of someone making $20 million when you are making six figures for the first time ever in your life, right? Like, you can't even comprehend what that money is. I remember I got my first check, my signing bonus after taxes was $24,000. I promise you I wasn't thinking about what Jake Delhomme was making. I was like, sweet, $24,000 all to myself. Like, and like, you're not worried about, what other guys are making because you're just happy that you're making money as well.
Right. And it is, yes, it's just fascinating to me to think about how, and I know you could say, hey, punters can last a long time, kickers can last a long time. Sometimes offensive tackles, there's offensive linemen who can last a while. But the average NFL career, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think is like 3.6 seasons. Most guys never most guys never even get to hit free agency and ever get to pay beyond what they made when they got drafted or in their initial contracts. And so this idea that Brady and Mahomes and some of these quarterbacks can keep banking money for year after year after year and play for a long time, and not only play for a long time, but do it at the highest possible salaries. I don't know that there's really any other comparison in any other sport. Does that make sense? Like, if you're an NHL player.
LeBron, that's like he started at 18. Like, that's kind of the best example. I mean, it's really hard, still hard to do, right? I mean, even the NHL, like, they draft young players. It's hard to play a long time in any sport.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think it's kind of wild to think about. Next week, do you expect, when does free agency officially start? The 17th or 18th?
Wednesday at 4.
Wednesday at 4. So on Monday and Tuesday, you can negotiate without actually agreeing officially to terms, and then that's how everybody at 4 o'clock suddenly becomes immediately signed. So do you expect it to be a free-for-all? Do you expect it to be wild next week?
I think those top guys are going to get paid, but the wide receiver market, for example, is so flooded with players that you could pay someone $18 million a year, or just pay someone who's probably just slightly worse, like $10 million a year, right? Like there's some markets that, like, offensive line, I think is going to go high because there's certain players I think that can specifically fit needs of contenders that you kind of need an offensive lineman here or there. There's a couple pass rushers. Shaq Barrett, I think, will get a ton of money to go somewhere. There's, like I said, individual players that'll get paid, but I think there's going to be a little bit depression as far as there's no middle class probably. So, I think players are going to try to reach out and get that money early on. If not, like we talked about, get 1-year deals.
Geoff Schwartz, fantastic as always. I appreciate my man. We'll talk to you next week.